So let's get to the topic at hand. I think this is when I heard about there's going to be a micro drone race at the National Museum for the United States Air Force over in Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. First of all, if you guys are within a few hours drive and have not been to this museum, do yourself a favor. It's every bit as good as any Smithsonian out there. It's just it's an amazing venue. But when I heard that there was going to be a drone race there, first of all, I said, how'd they pull that off? And second, I have to be part of it. And so let's start from the beginning, Kelly. What went through your mind to say, hey, I'm going to go talk to the people at the museum and see if they'll let us fly drones in there?
Yeah, that's kind of a mystery to me too. The original conversation, I can't remember exactly where it was or how it came about, but surely it was had something to do with Whoop Brothers sitting around talking about cool venues and where can we get into, and so I think I just had this wild idea that it would be really cool to fly through the airplanes in there. And I don't know if you have ever seen the Hiller Museum. They had a race there once, and that was a lot of my inspiration was from that, just seeing that race and knowing that the museum is right basically in my back door. I mean, I take my kids there all the time, it's easy for me to get to, but a lot of people have never even been there, let alone seen drone racing or any of that. Yeah. And so I think it was more about just finding a really unique place that I could get my friends to be able to fly. And, what cooler of a place to fly than someplace through, stuff like that. It's like, I mean, come on, really? It doesn't get much better than that, really.
No, not at all.
And certainly that is arguable, but it was a great time for sure. But yeah, so I don't know exactly how the conversation came about, but I just made it a goal. Like, I'm going to have a tiny whoop race there. It's going to be like, this is what I want to do. And so I went in on April 1st. I checked the other day just to double check the date that I'm telling people of when the emails went through. And so I went down, I cold stopped with my tiny whoop, and I talked to their events coordinator. Dawn was her name, and she was really nice, and she was kind of like confused about what I wanted, but she allowed me to come up into her office and, just show them to her and show her the remote or the transmitter and the goggles and kind of give her an idea. And she entertained even watching the Hiller Museum race. And so I just kind of left with this, like, I don't know. and she seemed really enthusiastic about it. But at the same time, we're talking drones on a military base inside of this place where people hold, these things dear to their heart, and heaven forbid something tiny and minute crash into it. But, I had this fear that, anybody does. The answer is going to be no.
Right.
But she entertained it. So we had a meeting with a few people several weeks later. And then we had that, there was okay, well, we need to have one more meeting with such and such in it. And I came into this room of 20 people. And, they have this long table, and they have the end chairs open for me and the director is right there. And they're like, oh, here's the director. And so he introduces himself, and he's like, I'm really excited about this. And I'm trying to bring in new entertainment, and, am very open to the idea of what you're trying to do. And so I just went for it and basically laid out, here's what we can do. This, it can be as small as some guys coming in here to race, or we can turn it into this, thing that could be, for everyone. And you could have drone simulators, and you could have people flying in drone cages and this and that and everything else. And I just kind of left it at that, and they totally took. I mean, you could see them all writing notes. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, man, they took all this to the bank. And I mean, you saw the turnout. And they like, so I made the drone race happen basically. And and so they did everything else. It's incredible how much work they did. But yeah, so I left there that day. Like, I kind of knew that was the day. That was the one meeting that I felt really confident about. I had the director right there, and he was asking all sorts of questions, and I just felt like, it was the cliche home run, if you will.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just kind of started hyping it then. I started hyping it in our small group, and then just moved to, once I had confirmed dates and started to kind of set information in stone, then I started to hype it on Facebook, and people just immediately were interested. It was incredible how much of a response, like people asking me, when are you going to open registration, weeks in advance. Like, at that point, I didn't even know when I was opening registration. And so it just turned into this really big thing that everybody was talking about. And so I drafted up a sponsor thing, and it was just like one pager Word document that essentially had, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm asking for, and here's how much you can give. And I sent that thing out, and I swear to you, when I sent it to every single one of those sponsors, I was like, they're just going to laugh. This is just silly. And, because I really did set my sights high. Like, there was not $100 tier on there. It started at $300 and went pretty high. So, and I had three companies come through with $1,000 per company. That was our second highest tier. So, I mean, I really set the bar high as far as, what the sponsors could contribute, because I knew that it was going to be big. And I knew that, if you think about the money that it costs to cover that many pilots, you
Right.
just start doing the math, and then that gives you about what each pilot's going to receive in the end, And so I couldn't believe the tremendous amount of support that I got from them. The first one that came back was TBS, and it was Wayne Ho, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. And then I got iFlight, and then I think it was Ready Made, and then Tiny Whoop. And then, they just kept coming, and Jeff Grabowski from Salt City Racing FPV, like 2 days before, donated $1,000 in cash for the prizes. So we stretched it from 8 paid pilots to 16 paid pilots. I mean, the outpouring was incredible, and surely the venue helped and all of that. But man, from planning it to all of it, it was like mind blowing. And I know I said this in posts, and I've talked about it, but Dan Driscoll and Tim Crete, those guys were like anything that I needed, and even things that I didn't even know that I need. Those guys were there.
Yeah.
Like Dan would hit me up at like 8:30. Hey, I'm about to put the kids to bed. You guys want to go on a quick conference call? And so we would jump on, Facebook Messenger call or whatever, and hash this stuff out. It's easier to have your voice and talk about it. And so he'd be sitting on his computer, we have our Google document spreadsheets up and stuff like that. And he'd just be going at it and going to town and delegating and doing this and doing that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Dan, thank you so much for doing this. And then Tim, he's like the man with the command station, and if there's like, he did all the additions to those little intro videos and just all these little tiny things that people don't really see. That I know how much time they take, and how much time that those guys actually spent on just this one race. And so I couldn't thank those dudes enough, as well as anybody else that helped. But man, when they were my two dudes that were like, they were it. And if I needed something or needed something delegated, and they actually taught me a lot too, about allowing myself to let other people do stuff. Because to be completely honest, it's hard to, like, that was my baby. And it's really, really hard to just let go and let other people do stuff for you. So it was a really good, for myself, it was also a really good learning experience because of how many things that I had to look at from a different perspective. So it was actually a really good all around experience.
So I want to take a step back here for a second and talk about, because you mentioned that there was a lot of interest almost immediately, and I can't say that I'm surprised by that at all. So you decided that you're going to cap the pilots at 40.
Yep.
And talk to me a little bit about that decision, and also tell me your feelings as the registration opened up and how registration played out not to give it away, but in those first few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really overwhelming. So the pilot cap, it came about because of time, strictly because of time. And as, you know, a race director, Tim, as a race director, he had a lot of input on that. And again, I go back to Dan and Tim because they were definitely the ones who helped to plan all of this. And I'll be completely honest, my original goal was 60 pilots. I'm like, I want 60. And Tim's like, and I was like, okay, well, 48. And he's like, well, look at these numbers. And so we looked at the museum opens at 9 and it closes at 5. And if you take the amount of pilots that we had at 40, that's 64 rounds into M main. So you have 50 normal rounds, and then 14 to get to M, and then we had 4 A mains.
Right.
So add 4 more. So we had 68 mains, and then you start doing the math on it. Well, if you figure in, let's just figure each heat is 2 minutes. Some go into 3 minutes,
right,
depending on the pilot's speed. So you shuffling pilots around, doing all that, you figure in a minimum, really, of 5 minutes per heat. And when you start doing that math, then it becomes clear. It's like, oh, shoot, we have like an hour and a half of potential mistakes. And believe me, an hour and a half of potential mistakes, an hour of that you're most likely going to fill up, because
right,
every minute is a minute. And when that happens those 60 times per race, then it adds up. And that's another reason why I try to run my races as commandingly, if you want to call it that, as possible. You know, I try to be fair, obviously, but we're there to do something, and you're there to do that exact same thing. It's like driving on the highway. You're on the highway. You're there to drive on the highway, so drive on the highway. we're here to whoop race. You have your whoop. We're here to whoop. Let's whoop.
Plug it in. Let's go.
That's it. So anybody that has ever been to a race that I have been in control of, if you want to call it that, they'll know I run a pretty tight ship, or at least I try to. And so knowing the time frame that it was going to take and all of that, that's why we decided on 40 pilots. And honestly, there's no way we could have done 48 pilots. I mean, we finished a half hour ahead, which was great. We started 10 minutes late, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there was no real downtime
there. I want to go back to, because I find this to be an incredibly interesting factoid about this event. You know, we talked about, so we capped it at 40 pilots. You open up registration, you did kind of a surprise announcement on a live stream on when registration would open. Tell me about how registration went, because I was watching, I was paying attention. I was actually sitting in my office watching your live stream thinking, all right, I'm not moving here until I get in and register for this race. Tell the folks at home that, you know, maybe they've never gone through this process. How crazy was this registration?
Yeah. So it was actually really crazy. You know, there were a lot of, again, go back to questions and Tim and Dan and my research and development team. we were like trying to figure out, of course, pilots and when to do it. And Tim normally did their opening on like, I think they do theirs on Monday mornings at noon or something. I was like, I want to do this on Friday. And I think it was a Friday. Or maybe it was a Saturday.
It was a weekday because I was at work.
It was a weekday.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might be right. I think it was a Friday because I was super amped to do it. But so we didn't know how to cap it on the internet or on the multi GP. So we were like, well, if it fills up that fast, then I don't know what we'll do. So, and then there was also thoughts of like, well, a wait list. So I watched it fill up. Like I was taking screenshots every time. But yeah, so we opened it up at noon. I believe it was a Friday at noon. And it filled up in somewhere between probably 17 and 20 minutes. I don't know the exact number, but it was fast. And so then the wait list started, and then I got messages for days. Oh, I can't believe I missed it. I'm so bummed. I can't believe I missed it. Can you put me on the wait list? And I'm like, yeah, the wait list is like 15 people long now, but yes, I'll put you on there.
We can run a whole other race with the wait list.
Yeah, we totally could have the original. And we wound up in the end we wound up going through before race day 5 of the top 6 that were on the wait list came. And then in the end, actually, one of our local pilots, Alex, he and his dad Joe were going to help with the simulators and other stuff like that, and we had another person out right at the end, actually able to race, which was really cool because he's one of our local guys. So yeah, that honestly, it was. I had no idea, and that was probably the moment where I was like, "Oh my God, this is gonna be huge." And that was one of the other selling points that I could send to sponsors, like. You don't understand. Like this race filled up, and pilots were paid in 24 hours, but this race filled up in let's call it 19 minutes. And so that helped a little bit, I think. But it was incredible. People wanted to do it because of the venue. I mean, that would be if I was just like, oh, well, this is at another chapter and I had no involvement whatsoever. Then I would be like, I want to go and fly in the museum. I don't even care if I win, But yeah, that was incredible. I couldn't believe it. And then we have the chat going. We have a little Woot Brothers chat as well, and everybody's like, 36, 37. Oh my God, it's full.